February 19th. Army camp near Vaucouleurs. This morning I woke to visions of fire and steel. These nightmares come more often, now that I've seen my beloved France eaten away by years of war. I wandered through camp, ignoring the new snowfall, but observing the wounds and weariness of every soldier under my command. Observing the desperation in their eyes. It was then that I first saw the girl. She told us that her name was Joan. She told us she was but a peasant who did not know how to ride or fight. She told us that she intended to rescue France. The darkness lifted from the men's souls. Her voice rang with conviction, and we drank in her every word. I may have lost my faith, but Joan has not lost hers, and that is enough for me. Joan has asked our ragged band of soldiers to take her to Chinon, where the rightful ruler of France, the Dauphin, hides from his foes. The war-torn land in between is infested with enemy marauders, and we will lose many men. Death is by now an old companion, but for Joan, we will face it again. As Joan's footsteps echoed down the marbled hall of the chateau, the fat and whispering dukes did naught but stare. The Dauphin himself seemed afraid as she kissed his feet. "My gentle Dauphin," she demanded, "why does England claim what is ours? Why are you not crowned King of France, as is your right?" The courtiers began to murmur. The Chamberlain whispered lies into the Dauphin's ear. But the Dauphin pushed the Chamberlain away and rose to meet Joan's gaze. She stands only to the shoulder of the shortest man, but all of us must look up to speak to her. I know not what silent conversation passed between the Dauphin and his would-be savior, but it was obvious that His Majesty was in the same thrall as we. March 26th, Chinon. It is one thing for a band of dispirited soldiers to put their trust in a teenage girl. It is entirely another for that girl to be given command of the army of an entire nation. We were filled with pride when we heard the Dauphin's heralds pronounce Joan the Maid as commander of the army of France. So that she may look like a general, the Dauphin presented Joan with a great war horse and a suit of white armor. Joan instructed me to look for an ancient sword buried beneath the altar of a local church. I was skeptical, but not only did the man unearth a rusted blade, but we found that the sword had belonged to Charlemagne, grandfather of France. I shall not doubt her word again. Still visible on the hilt was the fleur de lis. Joan adopted the fleur de lis as her symbol and had it blazoned upon her battle standard. Wherever Joan goes, the standard goes also. It goes with us to Orléans. The city of Orléans is one of the finest in France, but it is under siege by our enemies. England and Burgundy is about to fall. This war has dragged on for 100 years, with precious few French victories. The people of Orléans need a savior. They will receive Joan of Arc. Joan prophesied that she would be wounded at Orléans. At the height of the battle, an arbalest bolt knocked her from her horse. We could not believe our misfortune. But as we carried Joan away from the carnage, the battle was won. Orléans was free. When we entered the city, the entire population cheered us on from windows, rooftops, and city streets. They fired artillery into the night sky and shouted aloud their nickname for Joan, La Pucelle, the Maid of Orléans. June 14th, Orléans. Our rescue of Orléans was a setback for our enemies, but only a minor one. the English still possess half of France. Tragically, we have cooled our heels for weeks, while the Dauphin's advisors debate. Joan became irritated with the delay and reassembled her army. She talks of nothing but her mission to drive the English into the sea. The force of Joan's will is titanic. She has gathered to her banner swearing brigands and knaves and turned them into patriots and heroes. Among them is the man Laïr, a giant clad in plate mail. He drives men on with curses and fists. There will be plenty of English necks for Laïr to break and Pate. Pate is the gateway to the Loire River Valley. The English hold the Loire in a grip of steel, whilst a huge army under Sir John Fastolf devastates the countryside. Joan leads us to Pate to capture the English castles. However, we must avoid Fastolf's army until we are strong enough to face his veterans. After Pate, the myth of English invulnerability was dispelled. Now, our army knows it is possible to win, but only if we are resolute and cunning. The English are a most deadly enemy, and their longbow-men have decimated the charge of French knights time and time again. To make matters worse, we now face enemies on both sides. The Dauphin's advisors spend more and more time wrangling, jealous of Joan's influence at court. I pray that Joan can complete her divine mission before the Dauphin's envious advisors betray her. June 25th, Orléans. Dead France is returning to life. Our army swells with new recruits. In olden times, men swore fealty only to their particular lord. Now, we fight not for the insolent lords and ladies, but for France. For all of us, Joan is France. There is no distinction in our minds. The Dauphin himself has arrived in Orléans. Never have I seen such a celebration. France needs a king, so we must escort the Dauphin to Reims, where he can be properly crowned. Yet, the city of Reims is dangerously menaced by the Anglo-Burgundian army. The cities of Troyes and Chalon also bar the way. Joan commands that we must liberate all three cities before the coronation, and we eagerly seek to fight. As we rode into Reims, a sea of peasants and lords knelt before Joan. Some even knelt to kiss her horse's hoofprints. Cannon thundered, and 1,000 flags danced in the breeze. In the enormous palace, the Dauphin knelt before the Archbishop and rose as King of France. Prayers, anthems, and sermons filled the great chateau. Interspersed among perfumed dukes and ladies were tattered soldiers from our army, many still bearing wounds. Joan herself was at the king's side, as was her bedraggled battle standard. Despite the celebration, I know in my heart that this war is far from over. Our fathers and grandfathers died fighting the English. Joan gives us hope, but I do not know if hope is enough to ensure victory. September 3rd, France. France has a king once more. However, as Joan gains influence with the people, jealousy grows within the court. The king's evil advisors now seek to destroy Joan. It is only a matter of time before they succeed in poisoning the king's mind. Joan must hurry to fulfill her mission. Paris, the jewel of France, has been under English tyranny for decades, and French patriots trapped within the city are eager to escape. We are now marching on Paris, hoping that the reinforcements we have been promised will arrive in time. Tragedy. As the refugees fled into the chateau of Compiègne, Joan was trapped outside. Burgundian soldiers knocked her from her horse and paraded around with their prisoner. None of us can sleep knowing our precious Joan of Arc languishes in a Burgundian prison. The soldiers stare at the uncaring sky, condemning themselves for being unable to save her, or being unable to save France. Paris was the first major defeat ever dealt to our army. Had the king sent the promised reinforcements, we would have captured the city. Now it is France's darkest hour. July 14th, Bordeaux, new Joan of Arc. A rich world made empty and poor. The English put her on trial as a heretic. Joan's mind was as sharp as her sword, and she avoided all the cunning verbal traps of her prosecutors. In the end, Joan would not renounce her mission. The English found her guilty and burned her at the stake. But her death is not in vain. La Pucelle is the rallying cry as peasant and nobleman alike take arms. My army is an army of the people. And even without the king, we are poised to strike at the English stronghold of Castillon. A victory at Castillon will crush the English pretensions in France forever. Should I die in this battle, I die for the Maid of Orléans. I die as a patriot of France. A century of English toil, blood, and victories was reversed in a little over a year by a teenage girl. Your 100 years war has ended. Even more importantly, Joan's acts ignited a sense of French nationalism. Peasants and nobles alike no longer belong to lords and kings, but to France herself. We will not let Joan be forgotten. Already, statues and stained glass portraits have been commissioned in hundreds of towns and cities throughout France. The verdict of guilt was rightfully reversed, and I expect that Joan of Arc will soon be beatified as a saint. Sometimes the outcome of history is determined by strength of arms, other times by happenstance. But in 15th century France, history was determined by the will of a young girl, the only person in history to command the armies of an entire nation at the age of 17.
So, you want to know about Sforza? I will tell you about Francesco Sforza. Sforza was like me. We were condottieri, contractmen. When the Italian princes were too rich or too cowardly to get their hands dirty, they paid us. We fought because they paid us to fight. We stole because they paid us to steal. And when they did not pay, we made sure someone did. We sold ourselves to the highest bidder, and if another prince came with a bigger purse, we did not hesitate to change sides. Honor was cheaper than silver, but for Sforza, Sforza was different. He was in it for his own glory. That is why he took the Visconti contract. He wanted to make a name for himself, to be more than the bastard son of a dead mercenary. He needed a patron, an ambitious prince with many enemies and more gold than friends. Filippo Visconti, the Duke of Milan, was the obvious choice. Visconti had all the ambitions of Caesar, but none of the courage. He was craven and paranoid, but at least he paid. Well, most of the time. And whether his ambitions meant war with Florence or with Venice, Visconti always needed contractmen. That is why he hired condottieri like Sforza and Niccolò Piccinino, hungry men looking to make a name for themselves. Visconti distrusted and hated us, but I do not blame him. His own brother was murdered by a condottiero on the steps of a church. Visconti saw Sforza's successes as a threat and plotted to have him killed. But instead of running to safety, Sforza confronted the Duke directly. To our surprise, Visconti was so impressed by this boldness that he dismissed the charges against Sforza and betrothed the soldier to his daughter Bianca. This made Sforza the Duke's heir. I will say this about Sforza. He was a scoundrel, but he was no coward, and his courage was always repaid. After the wars with Venice, Visconti made sure he got his gold's worth out of us. He sent Sforza south to enforce the Duke's claims in Romagna. I think the Duke was having second thoughts about Sforza. After we left, Piccinino and his men followed us. Sforza could see through the plot. Although he was betrothed to the Duke's daughter, he knew Visconti was fickle. He also knew that being a landless condottiero was a risky proposition. Sforza needed to be his own man and have his own land. A refuge if the machinations of his employers turned against him, or if they demanded justice for Sforza's own treachery. What better opportunity than to use Visconti's weapons and money to his own benefit by making himself ruler of a city? Sforza and Piccinino were like two alley dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. They were natural rivals, precisely because they were so alike. Of the two, Sforza had a certain pedigree. If you could call being the bastard of a mercenary captain pedigree. From his father, Sforza inherited his forbitia, cunning, and used it to get the best of his rivals, his patrons, and his women alike. Piccinino, the son of a butcher, came into the profession as a soldier. He rose through the ranks and became an advisor to a trusting, yet incompetent condottiero. In this position, Piccinino lured his captain into an ambush and took command of the company. That Sforza and Piccinino would, years later, become blood enemies was as inevitable as two dogs fighting over a single piece of meat. If Sforza thought taking territory would make him safe, he was a fool. The King of Naples looked hungrily northward to the city so easily taken by a rogue mercenary. Sforza needed allies. Sigismondo Malatesta came with a Venetian force, as did Sforza's ever-loyal cousin Micheletto. But the condottiero needed a more powerful ally. He took his biggest gamble by going to meet an old friend. You might have thought that when Sforza walked into the Milanese court, that Visconti would have ordered him arrested, or that Piccinino would have personally killed him. But surprisingly, Visconti accepted Sforza like a father accepts his wayward son. Sforza and the Duke's daughter were finally wed, and the implication was obvious. Sforza would rule Milan when Visconti died. Whatever the Duke's intentions, this favoring of the prodigal son incensed Piccinino. He furiously tore his contract and stormed out of Milan. If Visconti would not see Sforza for what he was, Piccinino would find another patron. Pledging himself to the King of Naples, Piccinino had one goal: to destroy Sforza. The battle between Sforza and Piccinino was the centerpiece of the war over Italy. Sforza served Milan against Piccinino's Neapolitans. And then, Piccinino returned to Milan's service while Sforza went to the Venetians. No matter which banners they fought under, the rivalry between the two men became the one constant of the war. But Sforza's forbitia proved to be decisive. He defeated Piccinino in battles across northern and central Italy. The disgraced Piccinino was finally relieved by Visconti, and spent his last breaths in Milan cursing Sforza's name to his two sons. With his rival and equal finally defeated, Sforza seemed destined to fulfill his grandest ambitions. Then, by a twist of fate, Filippo Visconti died, undoing all of Sforza's plans. Visconti's death left Milan in turmoil. Outlying towns rebelled, and Venice threatened the city. By way of marriage, Sforza held a better claim on Milan than anyone. But strangely, the ambitious captain did not take his dowry. He allowed the lawyers and professors of Milan to fashion a republic with all the trappings and corruption of the old Roman one. They called it the Golden Ambrosian Republic, after Saint Ambrose. But there was nothing blessed or saintly about this republic. Surrounded by enemies, the Republicans of Milan, more skilled at reading books than leading men into war, needed a captain to command the war against Venice. Sforza, by now employed by the Venetians along with his compatriots Malatesta and Micheletto, did not miss an opportunity to once again betray those who paid him, as well as those closest to him. Rescinding his own claims on Milan, he agreed to serve the Republic against his own cousin Micheletto in exchange for control of the city of Brescia. The leaders of the Republic agreed, even though there were many rumblings that Sforza could not be trusted. After all, for a piece of land, he was now marching against his own blood.